Hi everyone, it's October now, so it is time for me to tell you about the books that I read in the second part of September. I know I said that I was going to read the third book in the Live Ships trilogy by Robin Hobb, but I haven't actually got round to that. I really want to read it, but I've got lots of other stuff that I need to read, and I know that if I start that, then everything else will just be put aside. So the first thing that I read in the second half of the month was The Art of Fielding by Chad Harbach. Now, I have no interest in baseball at all. I was pleasantly surprised by this book. This is why it is perhaps advisable to go into books with little expectation. It does revolve quite a lot around the sport and the sports team, but it deals with a lot of issues that you deal with at university. I'm not explaining this very well, am I? I think what was great about this is that all of the characters have very clear motives and they all have goals of where they want to be, and this is sort of about what happens when things don't quite go as we plan. Of course, this is something that happens all the time in life, but when you're at university, I feel like it's a time that it's really important and your goals are very important to you and they kind of define you in many ways. So yeah, it dealt with a lot of really interesting things and I was really impressed. I still have no more interest in baseball, but it was still really good. The next book that I read was also an audiobook. This was Sorcerer to the Crown by Zen Cho, and this is a recent release, a very recent release in fact. It's the first in a series or a trilogy or something. And I felt like there was a lot of setup in this, as first books go, I suppose. I was kind of hoping for a little bit more, but it did deal with some things that fantasy doesn't usually deal with. One thing being race. The main character, or one of the main characters, the Sorcerer Royal, is a black man. And he is in this position of power, but it's constantly being undermined by the colour of his skin, and people don't trust him. People don't think that he deserves to be where he is. This is all set in Regency era England, so I mean it's based in historical fact in that sense, but it is this magical world. I've heard that this is a bit like Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, but I haven't read that, so I can't really make it a comparison. But on top of race, it also talks about gender and gender equality, or the lack thereof. So obviously Regency era, women didn't really have many rights, and it's about rights to education as well, because women aren't allowed to be trained in magic. In fact, they get sent off to schools which try and kind of beat the magic out of them, which is problematic. So in that sense, it kind of felt like magic was being used as a metaphor for sex in this. So if you've read this and you have thoughts on that, let me know in the comments, because I'd love to discuss that. The next one is How to Be an Illustrator by Darryl Rees. This is just a whole lot of advice and sort of instruction on how to be an illustrator as a freelancer. If you're interested in becoming an illustrator, then obviously this is quite a good one to have, and I think I will probably look back at this quite a bit, and there are some useful tips. Fates and Furies by Lauren Groff. It's a story of a marriage, and it's told in two parts. We get, first of all, the husband's point of view, and then we get the wife's point of view. And there are all these sort of twists and turns and things that the husband didn't know about, and things that the wife doesn't know about. So yeah, it's a really interesting portrait in that sense, and I think it's really well crafted. But I've done a full review on this and I'll link that down below. The next book I read was another campus novel, and this was The Marriage Plot by Jeffrey Eugenides, which I was again very pleasantly surprised by. I think because I had really low expectations, because people say that this is not very good, and you know, especially compared to his other works. I've only read Middlesex. I haven't read The Virgin Suicides yet, but I do want to. I don't think it's as good a book as Middlesex, but I still really enjoyed it. I think that the characters were great and generally pretty interesting. I mean, a little bit caricature-y in places, but it felt like that was kind of the point. Again, if you want to talk about this, You can discuss it in the comments. I don't really have the time to talk about all of them in depth here. Then I read The Wolf Wilder by Catherine Rundell, and I listened to this one because I was doing the promotion with Audible and this was one of their September releases. I didn't realise going into this that it was a children's book, and for that reason I didn't really enjoy it as much as I maybe would have if I'd known going into it that it was a children's book. But I mean, it kind of reminded me of Egg and Spoon by Gregory Maguire, which I read at the beginning of the year, I think. Had that kind of fairy tale feel to it, and it's set in Russia, so there's lots of snow. This was a good book, but I don't think I was the intended audience, and especially not the version of me that didn't know what this book was. But yeah, like I said in my Audible video, I think that it would be good for a family road trip, and yeah, I just wasn't really the intended audience for this. Then I read a book that I didn't really enjoy. I have recently been welcomed into a book club, and this was the pick for this month. This is The Guest Cat, and it's a very short book, which is probably just as well because I would not have finished this if it had been any longer. I'm not really a cat person. Am I gonna lose a whole lot of subscribers because of that? Probably. I found that the writing and the world seemed quite bleak in many ways. You do find this with a lot of Japanese novels, but I just didn't feel like this had that something that other Japanese novels that I've read and liked have had. And I can't quite pin it down, but maybe it's the cat thing. Also, the characters do some weird things that I didn't really agree with. One that I would recommend though is the new Margaret Atwood, and I listened to this on Audible as well, and I also talk about it in my audiobooks video, which I'll link down below. It's a great story. I've heard a lot of people say that this is quite different from Margaret Atwood's other stuff, but I think she writes across so many different topics, and also she writes in lots of prose style. She's kind of like David Mitchell in that sense. So I could see similarities between some of her other works, especially The Handmaid's Tale and Oryx and Crake, which are two of my favourite works of hers. What she does really well in this is that she takes characters who really aren't that likeable, but makes you really care about them. And that's jolly impressive. I mean, not a lot of authors can do that well. The next book is also a very exciting new release, and I got an advanced reader's copy of this from Vintage. It's The Gap of Time by Jeanette Winterson. It's so exciting. I've recently been converted to Jeanette Wintersonism. I love her work so much. She really knows how to write a sentence. This is a retelling of The Winter's Tale by Shakespeare, and this is the first in the Hogarth Shakespeare series that Vintage are putting out. I think I'll do a full review on this because I have a lot of thoughts, but it's really good and you should pick it up. Yay! The final two are non-fiction, and I don't really talk about non-fiction all that much on here. Both of these are art books, and this one is Ways of Seeing by John Berger. This is a book that I probably should have read already. I can't believe I managed to get through an entire art history major without reading this book, because it's kind of, it's a fairly key text. It's very short, but these are essays that are looking at how we see the world. It's really important to both art and also design and advertising, just thinking about how we see. There is a wonderful essay in here about how women are viewed, and it's sort of all about the male gaze really, and women as objects. Oh gosh, I could probably do a whole video on this one as well. I don't know if I have time. But yeah, I would say that if you want kind of an introduction to art history and how we think about art, then this will be a really good place to start. Because I've done a lot of reading on these kinds of topics, not all of this was new to me. A few ideas were, but in general I was fairly familiar with them. But I think that, yeah, this would be a great introduction. So yeah, it's very short too, and has lots of pictures, which is great. This is the wonderful thing about art history books. Which brings me to the next one, because this is also an art history book, but I listened to it as an audiobook, which is a strange kind of experience, because when you're reading an art history book, it is filled with pictures. You get to see the actual things that they're talking about. And in audiobook, obviously that's not possible. So I did find myself looking up some of these artworks. I should probably tell you what the book is. It's the Faces of Britain by Simon Sharma. And what made this audiobook fantastic, and it made up for the lack of images, is Simon Sharma's narration. The way that he describes these artworks, you can almost see them anyway, so you don't need to actually see them. Almost. A lot of the images in this are quite well known anyway. It's all about portraiture throughout British history. So it is an art history book, but it also goes into sort of history of famous people and also the history of ordinary folk. So this book is split up into 5 parts. We've got the face of power, the face of love, the face of fame, the face of self, and the face of people. If you're interested in portraiture and art and the reasons that we create art, then this is a fantastic book. And I really would recommend the audiobook because the narration is just so good. It's narrated by Sharma and somebody else who does wonderful voices. He does a great Scottish accent and a great American accent, so that works very well. And yes, this is also a BBC series, I believe, that started last week, which is super exciting, and there's going to be an exhibition on at the National Gallery. I'm not sure if it started yet, but I'll put the dates down below. So there we are, those are the books that I read in the second half of September. Have you read any of these? Do you agree with what I think, or do you disagree? Tell me in the comments. Usual story. Thank you very much for watching, and I will hopefully see you next time. Bye!